Christianity and Pan-Korean Nationalism, Critiquing South Korea's Role as a Model in the Global War on Terror, presented for the July 26 to 28 12th International Conference on Interdisciplinary Social Sciences in Hiroshima, Japan as a virtual lightning talk by me, Professor Benedict E. Diedemann of the International Studies Department, Catholic University of Korea, Bucheon, Republic of Korea. A nationalist is someone whose intense self-identification with a community strongly affects their perception of reality. How this self-identification affects their perception of reality demonstrates clear patterns despite the different cultures of the different communities with which particular nationalists self-identify. The difference in behavior between nationalists and non-nationalists lies in the difference with which community members identify with the national community. In other words, the political psychological propensities of nationalists differ from non-nationalists. The result is different distinct patterns of policy preferences and willingness to sacrifice for the nation. Integration of minorities is predominantly a psychological process. If the minorities feel integrated into society, then they are integrated. In this figure, A represents a minority community, achieving, as perceived, in comparison with a core community, B. C represents a minority community, non-achieving, as perceived, in comparison with the core community, B. B represents the core community, that is, the comparison group, which sets the standards for cultural behavior evaluation that are hegemonic within the state. The minority community at position C will tend to be stereotyped as lazy and shiftless, that is, childlike, by the core, B, as well as by the minority A. Position A will tend to be stereotyped as aggressive, self-loyal, and parasitical by B and C, which is the anti-Semitic stereotype. A will tend to stereotype B as culturally primitive, cruel, and dangerous, that is, barbaric. The assimilation patterns that appear regarding minorities depends on where the minority is on this continuum, and this is taken from Milton Gordon, 1964, and Cottom in 2001. A behavioral predisposition will be present for the core community leaders, as well as the public, towards nationalistic behavior among the core community, in core community non-nation states like South Korea. A nationalistic elite will be present. The state, therefore, will show behavioral predispositions typical for a nation state. Behavioral tendencies will be similar to that of nation states because members of the core community are likely to think of their state as a nation state. But patterns of political behavior of minority communities who continue to resist integration will differ sharply from core community nationalism. And this is taken from Martha L. and Richard W. Cottom, Nationalism and Politics, The Political Behavior of Nation States, Lynn Reiner, 2001. Especially among minority group members seeking independence, particularistic nationalist behavior is likely to characterize such minority communities. Seeing themselves as superior to other groups and as the rightful comparison referent will be a predisposition of core communities which have 1. Exercised exceptional influence for a long period in large sections of the territorial community of the state, and 2. Having an institutional base which they have established well for maintaining that influence. Ethnic group comparison will nevertheless occur, as will some sense of one's own community position on a prosperity and influence scale, even when no such community exists in the territorial community. Therefore, the same psychological conditions for the shared sovereignty integration strategy apply for the utilitarian integration strategy. The individual members of the group have to perceive their group as wielding influence as a group in the community. So, for non-Christian Koreans, like Buddhists and others, it's important that they see themselves as wielding influence in South Korea in order for South Korea to integrate these groups into the core group, which we are arguing is the Christian minority in South Korea, which is also the Christian evangelical WASP community is the core group in the United States. Stereotype, an oversimplified perceptual image of the target. The occurrence of stereotyping is law-like in its occurrence under certain conditions. 1. Both individuals and governments simplify their perception of reality in order to facilitate processing of sensory inputs from the environment. 2. These simplifications show regular patterns under specific circumstances, stereotypes. The 3 factors which determine the extent and kind of stereotype to characterize the prevailing image are 1. Perceived capability distance, 2. Perceived cultural distance, which we already equated with perceived technological competence, and 3. The level of intensity of perceived challenge, either perception of threat, or perception of opportunity. Stereotypes are always personalized. The essential features of the image of dominant group towards a backward, quote-unquote, minority also parallels closely the imperial stereotype. Through years of oppression, a people under conquest can come to accept as just the conditions and positions in which they live. In this case, the analogy is that of the master. The imperial subject, in fact, often did refer to imperial officers and their compatriots by such name. Their dominating position was a reflection of the natural order since their masters were superior in every regard. Their exercise of control illustrated their superiority. The subject of this imperial control relationship tended to see the imperial masters as capable of hidden-hand operations. Hidden-hand operations are able to orchestrate schemes with such skill that the subjects could infer these schemes only after the event and never observe them. The acceptance of a subservient relationship, therefore, was unavoidable because resistance was perceived as useless. Active bargaining levers in international relations are levers that we call active because the state diplomat who's representing a government can vary their magnitude, offer $500 million, increase it to $1 billion. So active means that the size of the lever can be actively manipulated. That's different from passive levers, which are covered in slide 10, which refer to leverage that's very powerful in international relations that diplomats use to try to influence each other. But for purposes of understanding the particular issue that's under negotiation at that particular time, they cannot be varied in size, although of course they do vary in magnitude over years, decades, generations, including, for example, the spread of Christian religiosity in South Korea. 130 years of American missionary activity, together with 70 years of American tutelage, has encouraged the development of a shared national identity component in South Korea and the United States. Today, Asians are the fastest growing, highest income racial minority group in the United States, and 61% of U.S. Koreans are Protestants. This shared national identity component includes a focus on Christianity as a transnational community of believers. This shared national community identity component, together with American success in the Cold War and South Korea's rapid economic development, produced significant soft power influence capability by these two polities towards each other. The U.S. promotes South Korea to showcase the benefits from close collaboration with the United States that continues during the global war on terror. Korean nationalism in South Korea has come to side with the U.S. because of these factors, together with the failure of the North Korean development model. South Korean Christian religiosity is strong. South Korean Christian missionary activity is relatively intense. South Koreans are the second largest national group of Christian missionaries. One 2000 report noted that only the United States sends a greater number of missionaries abroad. The South Koreans send 12,000, whereas the United States sends 46,000, but still South Korea sends twice as many as Great Britain abroad every year. Western media reports in 2004 included the kidnapping of 8 South Korean missionaries in Iraq, who were later released, and the beheading of another missionary hostage. BBC 2007 report on the kidnapping of 23 South Korean missionaries in Afghanistan, 2 of whom were killed, notes that South Korea had by that time sent 17,000 missionaries to 173 countries. North Korea is a target of South Korean missionary activity, along with the Korean minority elsewhere in China as a focus. One Western media report noted that historically Christianity was more successfully suppressed in Japan and China than in Korea. In Korea, it became associated with the resistance struggle against Japanese colonialism in 1910 to 1945. South Korea's economic and political development through its Cold War client relationship with the United States has produced substantial soft power advantages. It uses them in the form of bargaining leverage in the post-Cold War era regionally and globally. Current and former client states, like South Korea, have leverage over their respective patrons, like the United States. This leverage also applies towards the United States. South Korea's importance for U.S. containment strategy during the Cold War gave it influence in U.S. government circles. Today, this leverage derives from Korea's soft and hard, including economic, power-based bargaining leverage towards the U.S. and the world. Using power, according to Joseph Nye, is not just about the use of force, but also about who we can get to agree with us and who currently agrees with the other side. Non-governmental organizations possess this power as much as governments, and NGOs are capable of building coalitions for these issues. Shared religiosity provides an additional source of leverage between South Korea and America, and is certainly one way to get more Americans to agree with the South Korean view. This usefulness will continue along with the rise in competition between the US and China, which may come to play itself out within the politics of Korea to a significant extent.